Good morning. Thank you for attending our CRMSDC Business Consortium Hot Sheet Live, our special edition of Where is the Money? And this is part 13. Can you believe we've done 13 of these webinars? And we thank, if this is your first time, we say welcome. If you're returning, we say thank you. Today's topic, we're 12 days into January. We have said goodbye to 2020. Although we accomplished a whole great deal, there was a lot happening there. But we thought we'd start off this year with the new economic outlook, what's in store for 2021, featuring none other than Aniban Basu. So we're excited about to do that. So we will get started in about 2 minutes or so. And things have not changed. And so I'll prep for this session still remains the same. Make sure this is going to be a awesome hour that you're going to spend with us. So make sure you have your comforts around you. Make sure you've gotten everything you want out the refrigerator. And I have a new drink for you this time. Instead of the mimosas and the Bloody Marys, how about putting some Maker's Mark in your tea? Let's try that for 2021. We'll be back in just a few moments. Those are our housekeeping tips for today. And we ask that you follow us on social media at CRMSDC. See you in just 1 minute. Good morning. I am Sharon Pender, President and CEO of the Capital Region Minority Supply Development Council, and also I'm the operator of the U.S. Department of Commerce Minority Business Development Agency, MBDA, Business Center, Washington, D.C., and the MBDA Federal Procurement Center. And so our MBDA centers, along with Capital Region Minority Supply Development Center, are hosting today's webinar. So thank you for attending. We have an exciting topic for today, and we're glad that you're here. 2020, I think everybody has an historic perspective on 2020, and we all have been heavily impacted. And so when we talked about how do we begin 2021, because our mission continues to be to ensure that we add value by providing valuable information that will help you with your business, that will help you with making decisions day to day. And so we thought that the first thing that we would do, or the topic that we would cover, is what is the impact, what's happening in the economy? What is the pandemic, post-pandemic outlook on the economy? And so that's the conversation for today. But before we get started, let's review the agenda. And I'd like to And so I'm going to bring on in just a moment Frank Kelly, who is our newly elected chair of our board of directors of Capital Region Minority Supply Development Council. Then we'll hear from Aniban Basu. We'll have some announcements at the end. Oh, and we will give away not one, but 2 round trip tickets to Southwest Airlines, anywhere Southwest flies. Then you may be saying, well, I'm not getting on the plane right now, but best believe as we get through where we're going through, there will be a plane waiting for you. So you have to be present to win. And yes, we strategically put it at the end, so you would, but you'll enjoy yourself so much that you won't even realize it's at the end. And so let's move on to the next slide, because what I'd like to be able to do is bring on, or thank, first of all, our sponsors. We could not do this, number one, without the commitment from MBDA, the Minority Business Development Agency and its commitment to minority businesses with COVID. And we absolutely could not do this. These are some of our premier sponsors. We could not do that without them. And some of them are corporate sponsors, but they also are sponsors from our MBE community, including CompuGain, AMCUS, of course, a premier sponsor, JDC Events, SB and Company, and Stroud Priest. Next slide, please, because I want everybody to see all of our sponsors. And these are folks that are committed to our mission of supply diversity. But let's get on with the day's presentation. I'd like to first bring on, so he can say Happy New Year to you, Frank Kelly, who is our chairman of our board, but he's also the manager of diverse business empowerment with Exelon Supply Chain. He's responsible for the overall management and administration of BGE Exelon Supply Diversity Program. People know who Frank is. He's a household name. He has been in this fight for quite some time, and we love the fact that his responsibility includes developing strategy, processes, and systems that actively engage and align BGE employees, diverse organization, and suppliers. So, Frank, without further ado, I just want to say hello and thank you for your commitment to everything that we do.
Good morning, Sharon, and thank you for inviting me to be here this morning. First and foremost, as mentioned, I want to thank you as well as the outgoing chair, Diane Dempsey, and the entire council for the opportunity to welcome everyone to our meeting this morning, as I'm excited to hear the very informative and entertaining Anaban Basu today. You know, although 2020 was a challenge, I learned a lot in 2020, and it's because of the hard work and leadership of Diane and Kevin Williams, who's the chair of the MBE Input Committee, and the entire board and council members. I believe the foundation has been laid for 2021 and beyond. What I'm looking at and what I see is really engaging virtually with purpose and power. We were able to pivot during 2020 like I've never seen a pivot before, and successfully do it. Looking forward into using that as the foundation, looking forward to 2021, putting in place, you know, a strategy where we can communicate, because communication is very important. That I learned last year. You know, transparency is really important. Collaboration, working together, all stakeholders, whether it's the MBEs, corporate members, our external customers, the community that we serve, and lastly, building on that is really getting a commitment to actually engage both virtually and in person, so that we can take this council to the next level, connecting all the stakeholders, not only in this community, but across the nation, as we get back on this plane in 2021 and continue to take this council and the MBEs to the greater and higher heights. As representative of Exelon, on behalf of them, Exo, I'd like to greet you and welcome you, because we see it as a purpose, clean energy and a brighter future for our customers and community. This is a part of ensuring that we are an economic engine in the communities where we operate and where our employees live and work. You know, one way we do this is through supporting community-based businesses and making sure that we provide access and opportunities where previously there have been hurdles. The support and guidance and expertise from this board, the Capital Region, plays an important role in getting us to that level. You know, in 2020, in December, BGE announced that it's pledging $15 million to assist small businesses with COVID relief and recovery. Starting in January, eligible businesses located in BGE Central Maryland service areas can apply for these BGE Energy Small Business Grants up to $20,000 each. The grant program is a multi-year commitment, and it's expected to run through at least 2023. This program is also designed to help state businesses and residents recover from the economic hardships caused by the pandemic. There will be additional information on the BGE Energizing Small Business Grant Program, the applications and deadlines, and that should be announced sometime in this month in January. The programs that we're working in, our commitments to work with the council. As Sharon knows, we are currently working on a supply development program with the council so that we can help to grow the capacity of minority-owned businesses in the capital region. I look forward with excitement and anticipation for 2021 and the challenges that we will face, because I know that's only going to make us stronger, wiser, and better. So thank you, Sharon, for the opportunity to bring welcomes this morning. Bring the welcome.
And Frank, thank you. You know, my mother told me a long time ago to put your money where your mouth is, and that is what Exelon is doing. And so we appreciate that. And so thank you for mentioning the program that we're engaged in as a council that will be rolling out in January. And that was that was Exelon coming to us and saying that we want to, we have a commitment to African American businesses, and we want you to develop a supplier program geared toward African American businesses. And so that's what we'll be rolling out. More to come on that. But again, Frank, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for everything that you continue to do for our community, and in your role as manager at Exelon. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Sharon. Thank you, and thank you for the wonderful work. And I pray that you continue to do that work for many more years to come.
Oh, I'm not a young woman, so we'll see. Okay, so what we've all been waiting for is the Annabon Basu presentation, Chamber of Data, I believe it's called, but you're going to learn a lot. Annabon Basu is chairman and CEO of Sage Policy Group, Inc., an economic and policy consulting firm headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland, with an office in Indonesia. The firm provides strategic analytical services to energy suppliers, law firms, medical systems, government agencies, and real estate developers, among others. In 2014, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan appointed him chair of the Maryland Economic Development Commission. He also serves as chairman of the Baltimore County Economic Advisory Committee. He is the chief economist to Associated Builders and Contractors and chief economic advisor to the Construction Financial Management Association. He lectures at Johns Hopkins University in global strategy and has also taught international economics, urban economics, micro and macro economics at Hopkins. His radio show can be heard weekday at 88.1 FM WYPR. So ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to, a lot of you already know, but if you have never heard him, you're in for a treat. Good morning, Annabon.
Good morning, Madam Secretary Pinder, and thank you to all the stakeholders at the CRMSDC for being with us this morning. Thank you again to Frank Kelly, of course, for his gracious comments, and also to Exelon and all the other sponsors for making this possible. Indeed, I will be talking about the economy today, and I'm going to be try to be as accurate as possible. Now, you've already heard one falsehood today. And when was that uttered? When Sharon Pinder said she is not a young woman. That is a falsehood. I hope to be much more accurate than she has been this morning. So let's go to the first slide then of the presentation. I believe Nicole, there it is. So my presentation today is entitled Annabon Basu and the Chamber of Data. It is a Harry Potter themed presentation, and I'm going to talk about the economy in 2021. And again, thanks to all the sponsors and all of you for being here today. Next slide, please. And of course, the most influential factor shaping the 2020 economy, of course, was COVID-19. We were prisoners, many of us, in our homes. Here I've shown perhaps a non-representative American family. But set that aside, the fact of the matter is that was what really impacted us, COVID-19, and the response put forth by many policymakers to that. Let's talk a little about that. Next slide, please, Nicole. Different countries around the world responded differently. It was a global economy transfigured. Now, this map gets at workplace closures. These are government-mandated workplace closures. Now, the darker red color, let's call it, it's not clear what, rust, let's call that color rust. That darker rust color speaks to nations that really had very strict workplace closures. Now, two nations I want to focus on today, America and China. And you can see that they required workplace closure for some employers, but not for all. I mean, we had Walmarts that were open and grocery stores, so on and so forth. So along this dimension, there was not much distinction. You will notice that a number of African countries, for instance, but also you see some of this in Latin America, did not have basically any restrictions whatsoever. And we'll talk more about those countries in a moment as well. Now, next slide, Nicole. So, that previous slide was about workplace closures. This is stay-at-home requirements. And again, you can see, some of these African nations not with particularly stringent requirements. But then again, focusing on China and the United States. China very aggressively shut down its economy early on, at least with respect to people moving about. I mean, there were significantly strict stay-at-home requirements. This is not about lauding the Chinese government, by the way. That's not what this is about. It's to point out that, we in America, we put forth a particular strategy to deal with this crisis. And one of the things we're going to want to do as a society is to do a bit of a post-mortem, to ask the question, if this ever happens again, what would we do differently? And how can we generate better outcomes the next time around if this ever happens again? Of course, we all pray that it does not. But again, along this dimension, China much more strict. Next slide, please. And that might help explain why China grew last year economically and America did not. Now, on this slide, green is good, red is bad. The nations in green grew. You'll notice a lot of the African nations, by the way, where we didn't see a lot of shutdowns of economic activity, actually grew economically. You see that in Egypt and Ethiopia, so on and so forth, Tanzania, Ivory Coast, which is a single man I called Cote d'Ivoire as part of a broader strategy. In any case, what was the fact that the Chinese shut down their economy so aggressively early in the crisis a reason for their being able to be in better shape by the end of the year economically? And again, you might conclude, or one might conclude, that America's response to COVID-19 was perfect. We did everything we could. We shouldn't have done anything differently. But it's a question that should be asked. In any case, this gives you some sense that there were some nations that grew economically last year, but they were few and far between. And actually, Africa represented a significant share of the nations that grew economically last year. Next slide, please. I can put this to you in more detailed terms. These are estimates from the International Monetary Fund. You look toward the middle of the slide, you'll see that the estimate for 2020 GDP, we don't have final GDP data yet from the US Department of Commerce, but that the US economy shrank 4.3% economically last year, while China grew nearly 2%. So there are two superpowers in the world, America and China. America home to the largest economy in the world, China second, and China won 2020. China won 2020 pretty easily. Now, you might view that as bad news or not news or whatever it happens to be, but there is this bipolar world right now, or multipolar world in terms of global powers, and at the lead, at the vanguard, are America and China won, ironically, as that's where COVID-19 began, won, at least economically, 2020. But you'll notice that, vast parts of the world, India, Spain, shrank massively last year. Italy shrinking nearly 11% last year. So 2020 was rubbish from the perspective of global economic growth. And we'll talk more about that perhaps during the Q&A session. But next slide, please. Let's talk about America. And of course, one of the implications of a shrinking economy is plentiful job loss. And we lost a lot of jobs. Now, next slide, please, Nicole. This is monthly job growth in America. This is net change in U.S. jobs, and we've graphed this for you back to December of 2002. So this represents precisely 18 years of data. So the blue-colored bars stretch until February of 2020. February of 2020 represented the 113th consecutive month of job growth in America. And over that 113-month period, our nation added 22 million jobs. We drove the overall rate of unemployment down to 3.5%. That was a 50-year low. You'd have to go back to December of 1969 to find unemployment as low as it had been pre-crisis. And just to give you a sense of how long ago that was, the Orioles were good back then. That just gives you some sense of how historic that economic expansion was. Now, the blue-colored bars here are indexed to the left-hand axis. As it turns out, I had to bifurcate the axes, and that sounds and is excruciatingly painful. The first red-colored bar here is March. That's when we start to lose jobs as we shut down the economy. And those red colored bars are indexed to the right-hand axis. So in March, we lose 1.4 million jobs, but that's really misleading because the so-called reference week, the week during which the underlying survey was conducted, was relatively early in March. So a lot of the jobs lost in March were not captured in that March jobs report. Those lost jobs would show up in the April jobs report, along with some of the jobs lost in April, of course. And in April, we lose 20.8 million jobs, which is why I could bifurcate the axes, because if I try to graph that on a single unified axis, a lot of these other vertical bars simply disappear. To do the math on that, between March and April, we lose 22 million jobs, precisely the number of jobs we added during the previous 113 months. And economists surveyed around that time by the Wall Street Journal, mainly economists who work for large US financial institutions, but also some prominent academics, collectively projected that we would lose another 8 million jobs in May. But we didn't. We added 2.7 million jobs in May, followed by 4.8 million jobs in June, and 1.8 million jobs in July, and nearly 1.5 million jobs in August, and more than 700,000 jobs in September, and more than 600,000 jobs in October, and 336,000 jobs in November. Unfortunately, that 7-month winning streak came to an end, you might have heard, in December, with the nation losing 140,000 jobs. But if you look at the early stages of expansion, they were quite dramatic. And keep that in mind as we talk about the outlook for 2021 and beyond. The American economy manifested enormous recuperative powers. Our ability to heal ourselves is really, really quite remarkable. But we'll talk about why we've all of a sudden lost some of that momentum, or a lot of that momentum, more recently. Next slide, please. Now, the worst period was from February of 2020 through April of 2020. And that's what this graph is about, that period. So as I say, in February, we were adding jobs. We added 251,000 jobs in February as a nation. And it's hard for me to express to you how good this economy would have been in 2020 but for COVID-19. Because we came racing into this year with momentum, lots of momentum. Now, again, these are percentages. I'm comparing February of 2020 versus April of 2020. So the sector called leisure and hospitality lost 49.3% of its jobs, let's say about half of its jobs. So who are these folks? These are restaurant workers and hotel workers. So a lot of the job loss, as you know, was among entry-level positions or near entry-level positions. You probably heard about this notion of a K-shaped recovery, the notion that the rich got richer. Yeah, that's right. Jeff Bezos got richer. Elon Musk got richer. A lot of wealthy people got much wealthier. And if you didn't know anything about 2020 other than the stock market's performance, a NASDAQ sitting over 13,000, the Dow Jones, which today is sitting above 31,000 on the Dow, you would think, my goodness, the economy must have been terrific in 2020. Well, it was for some people, those who owned assets. But for people in these entry-level or near entry-level positions in hotels, restaurants, retailers, so on and so forth, salons, daycare centers, home healthcare workers, not a good year at all for the most part. You'll notice that every major segment of the economy lost jobs during this February 2020 through April of 2020 period. Now, Nicole, next slide, please. Same setup on this slide, except now it's February of 2020 to December of 2020. And all I'm trying to show you here is some degree of repair. So when you look at leisure and hospitality, for instance, which had lost 49% of its jobs between February and April, by December, it had clawed back many of those jobs. And in general, with the exception, for instance, of mining and logging, most sectors improved their economic performance after April as we reopened the economy. Next slide, please. Now, don't get me wrong. Even though the initial phase of recovery was quite profound, I'm not suggesting to anyone here that we're anywhere close to complete recovery. If you compare December 2019 US employment versus December of 2020, we're down 9.4 million jobs. Number one sector losing jobs, again, leisure and hospitality, 3.8 million. But notice the second category here, which might be of interest to many stakeholders on this conference, government. Because as you know, state and local governments have to balance their budgets each and every year. And if the revenues are not there, they must cut costs. And the principal cost of government is human capital, it's people. It's teachers and firefighters, police officers, teachers' aides, garbage collectors, so on and so forth. And another way, of course, to cut government expenses is to cut back on contractual obligations. So 1.3 million jobs lost in the government sector. So the public sector's woes have added to the private sector ones. And we'll talk more about this in the context of stimulus later on in the presentation. So again, the initial phase of recovery was quite dramatic, but I don't want anyone to get the idea that I think that we're anywhere close to complete recovery. We clearly are not. And of course, in December, we took a step back by losing those 140,000 jobs on net. Next slide, please. Now, some groups, of course, were more affected by unemployment than others, and you've undoubtedly heard that, but here I'm offering you some data. So I've got too much data on here by half. Lots of stuff going on here, too many bars. But if you look at the light blue colored bars for each group, that was the pre-recession unemployment rate. So the recession begins in February. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So January was the last pre-recession month, and you can see in January where the unemployment rates were for whites, Black/African Americans, Asians, and Hispanics. Pretty low by historic standards. The red bars represent the peak achieved for each of these demographic groups, which happened either in April or May. And you can see what happened, for instance, the African American rate of unemployment by April and May, what happened to the Hispanic rate of unemployment. It's under those circumstances that minority businesses, minority suppliers become especially important in serving as a backstop to economic decline. So again, the work that Sharon Pinder and others do is of enormous importance, particularly when the economy isn't so good, which it is not so good right now. That said, the purple colored or blue colored bars here are December of 2020 unemployment for these same demographic groups. And you can see again evidence of progress. Don't get me wrong. The African American unemployment rate or Black African American unemployment rate, which had been at 6.1% early last year, by the end of last year was at 9.9%. That is a meaningful departure from the pre-existing trend. And you can see similar phenomenon among Hispanics and others. Again, nowhere close to full recovery. Many people slithered out of a job, but involuntarily, as it turned out. But nonetheless, signs of progress. But again, you can see the impact disproportionately upon minorities. Next slide, please, Nicole. Now, we could talk about some regional economic data as well. Let's talk about Baltimore Metro. I'm from Baltimore, and I'm trying to play like a raven here. So Baltimore region lost 71,700 jobs on a year-ago basis. So here I'm comparing November 2019 employment versus November of 2020. So the region is down about 72,000 jobs, has lost about 5% of its pre-existing employment base. Number one sector losing jobs, while mimicking the nation, leisure and hospitality at 23,200. There was one sector of the Baltimore area economy that held up pretty well, construction. So we had a lot of emergency construction spending last year. For instance, when they turned the Baltimore Convention Center into a temporary hospital, construction firms generally came into the period with lots of backlog, plentiful amount of public work and so on and so forth. So construction, and we also saw a housing building boom, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Next slide, please. A lot of you might care more about the Washington metropolitan area, which over the last 12 months, again, November of 2019 versus November of 2020, lost 180,000 jobs, or 5.3% of job totals. Again, where was the principal center of job loss? Leisure and hospitality, 78,000 jobs. The Washington Metro has, of course, a massive federal sector, lots of medical research, lots of white-collar professionals who can work remotely, people who are better positioned to survive economically this pandemic because they can work remotely. But leisure and hospitality workers, of course, restaurant and hotel workers don't have, generally speaking, that same opportunity, and those are often entry-level and near entry-level jobs. And so one of the implications of that is, in addition to minorities being disproportionately affected, young people were disproportionately affected as well, and young minorities in particular. And again, this gives us some sense of why minority-owned businesses, minority-empowered businesses are so important, because they are more likely to be in the communities with these dislocated young workers. But you can see here again, lots of carnage here, lots of job loss across major segments of the economy. It might surprise you that health services lost jobs. So how could that be, Anibad? We've heard that healthcare workers are overwhelmed dealing with COVID-19, and people in intensive care unit beds, so on and so forth. That's true. But when you've got postponed elective surgeries, a lack of wellness visits, a lack of visits to the dentist, and then a lot of home healthcare workers no longer being invited into homes during this pandemic, you end up losing a lot of healthcare workers as well. And then you can see government losing jobs in the Washington region as well. Next slide, please, Nicole. Now we can broaden this from a national economic perspective, still look at regional data, but now from a national perspective. This is employment growth for the 25 largest metropolitan areas in America, November 2019 versus November 2020. The December data are not yet available for the regions. It's available for the data are available for the nation, but not the region. So that's why it's the November through November comparison. Now, it's really a mistitled slide because it says employment growth. There's no growth here. Every major region of the country has lost jobs on a year-ago basis, but some regions have lost fewer jobs than others. Who has lost the fewest? The smallest share of its pre-existing employment base, Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, Texas, home to the sorry Cowboys. 2.5% of their pre-existing job base has been lost. Congratulations to the Washington football team for winning the division. Dallas, what do you know about Dallas? Well, who's the governor of Texas? That's right, it's Greg Abbott. Greg Abbott has been one of these governors who's been very keen on trying to keep his economy open. At number 2, Phoenix. Who's the governor of Arizona? Correct, it's Doug Ducey. Doug Ducey, again, one of these governors who's been very aggressive in trying to keep his economy open. Who's at number 3? Atlanta. Well, you know the governor of Georgia, it's Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp, again, very aggressively keeping his economy open. In fact, he was the first governor in the nation to reopen his economy, happened on April 20th of last year. So some governors have been fixated on the economic and employment outcomes. Other governors more focused on the public health outcomes. Who has the most job loss here? New York Metro. Who's the governor of New York? Andrew Cuomo. And of course, New York was an early stage viral epicenter, and one of the things that they observed was that the use of mass transit helps to spread the virus. But if you shut down mass transit in New York, you pretty much have to shut down the economy. San Francisco at number 22, tied for number 22. Who's the governor of California? Correct, it's Gavin Newsom. Very handsome gentleman himself, could be a Hollywood actor. But again, one of these governors who has tried to keep his economy pretty much closed, so his own behavior has departed from that occasionally. In any case, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Riverside, with high rates of job loss. Now you might say, Aniban, sir, I see a contradiction here. I see Tampa at number 6. That's Florida. That's Governor Ron DeSantis, again, very aggressive in keeping his economy open. And at number 22, Orlando. Same governor, same state, Aniban. What gives? What gives is the structure of the Orlando metropolitan area economy. Orlando is about theme parks, restaurants, retail trade. It's about in-person experience, not about remote work. So these data reflect many things, including the structure of regional economies, and also public policy. Now you can see Baltimore and Washington huddled there in the first column with unemployment rates of around, with job loss rates of around 5% to 5.3%. Generally speaking, holding up better than most of the country, which you would predict based on the large population of white-collar workers. Next slide, please, Nicole. So this is unemployment. So unemployment, as I say, came into the crisis at 3.5%. By April, it's 14.7%, and for women, it's over 16%. Women have suffered relatively more during this economic crisis than men. That's different from the previous economic downturn, the Great Recession, when generally speaking, men suffered more due to massive job losses in construction and manufacturing to male-dominated sectors. Now, by December, the unemployment rate was down to 6.7%. There's some progress. This is also misleading, however, because about 3.9 million Americans have left the workforce, are no longer looking for work. And if you add those people back in, the unemployment rate is closer to 9%. Nonetheless, there is some evidence of improvement here. Next slide, please, Nicole. And I can show you the same unemployment rate data now for the regions. Now, some regions, again, are structured to have fared better than others. Minneapolis is a region with lots of white-collar workers, lots of medical research, and a lot of people who are used to working remotely. Minneapolis is freezing, particularly this time of year, and they get lots of snow. So a lot of workers suffer interruption in terms of being able to get to work. That's been true for years. And so they might have gained the capacity to work remotely. And that very much came in handy during this crisis. St. Louis, what's that about? Well, who's the governor of Missouri? Yeah, it's Mike Parson. Mike Parson, again, one of these governors who's worked very hard to keep his economy open, who has the highest rate of unemployment here in Los Angeles, again, Governor Gavin Newsom. You can see Baltimore and Washington there at 6.1% and 5.8% unemployment respectively, below the national average. Again, evidence that the region has, as one would predict, held up better than much of the balance of the country. Next slide, please. Now, there have been major responses, obviously, to the crisis, including in forms of stimulus. Next slide, please, Nicole. To date, we've had 3 major rounds of federal government stimulus. The first one was signed by the president, the current president, on March 27th, the CARES Act, the $2.2 to $2.3 trillion package. We saw another stimulus package passed in April, less than a month later, to put more money into the Paycheck Protection Program. You remember that the money set aside for the Paycheck Protection Program ran out very quickly, and more money was put into the Paycheck Protection Program. And then more recently, on December 27th, 9 months precisely to the date after the president signed the CARES Act, he signs the Consolidated Appropriations Act after a week of not doing much, a $906 billion package. Again, more assistance to Americans in the form of direct payments. They're smaller this time around. Stepped up unemployment insurance benefits. Those federal unemployment supplements are smaller than they were the first time around. And then more assistance for businesses. So again, we are seeing further stimulus in the U.S. economy. Next slide, please. We'll talk about the implications of that as we go through this, but one of the things that you're probably going to hear from Congress this time around is more focus on the national debt. Now, I don't want to get cynical here, and I certainly don't want to sound partisan, but I am trying to help members of this audience deal with what's about to come. And my guess is, and you may disagree with this violently, is that Congress did not seem to be so concerned about the national debt or federal budget deficits when Donald Trump was president, but that a lot of members of Congress may become more concerned about the national debt once Joe Biden is inaugurated. So maybe that sounds too cynical, but that's what I expect. And so I would not be surprised if we see many debt ceiling crises during the years ahead. So something to watch for. And the fact of the matter is we do have a large national debt. We came in to the crisis with a national debt of $23.5 trillion. It's now closing in on $28 trillion. And I'll talk a little bit more about this very late in the webinar. Next slide, please. Now, of course, the Biden administration has its own priorities. In the near term, one of those priorities is providing more assistance to state, local, and tribal governments. As you know, under the most recent stimulus package, there was no financial assistance offered to state and local governments, though they are hemorrhaging revenues and hemorrhaging workers. My guess is that very early after inauguration, the Biden administration will push heavily for assistance to state and local governments, as well as more spending on infrastructure, perhaps also stepping up unemployment insurance benefits, and also putting more money forth to support businesses and entrepreneurs, including in minority-oriented communities or majority-minority communities. We shall see. And of course, he's dealing with a Congress, and you might say, well, Adiban, he's got the majority in the House of Representatives, and now he's got the majority via Kamala Harris's deciding vote, Vice President Kamala Harris, or Vice President-elect Kamala Harris's deciding vote in the Senate. But when you've got centrist Democrats like a Joe Manchin in West Virginia, who basically has said that he is not going to allow a progressive agenda to move forward, and you might think that's good or bad news, but the point is you do have some centrist Democrats who occasionally vote with Republicans, so it's not an ironclad Democratic majority in the Senate. So we will see what the Biden administration can get done, and the honeymoon period may not even exist, given all the blood in the water in Washington, D.C., quite literally in Washington, D.C. Next slide, please. And then from the longer term perspective, a big focus in the Biden administration on manufacturing, and a lot of talk in the Biden materials about good union jobs. And so you will see an effort, I think, by the Biden administration to put unions front and center. A lot of focus on building a modern infrastructure. And that's one thing about which Democrats and Republicans agree, that this nation does not spend enough on infrastructure. So one of the things that you might see coming out of this embattled Congress is an infrastructure package, and I actually hope that happens, though I know that would push up the national debt. It would be a way to deal with some of our infrastructure deficits, better compete with the Chinese and other emerging powers, while also accelerating U.S. economic recovery from COVID-19. He talks a lot about, the administration will talk a lot about childcare, caregiving generally, and educating the workforce. So you might see a lot of apprenticeship programs, support for apprenticeship programs, including the skilled trades like carpentry, electrical work, plumbing, machining, and welding. And then a lot of focus on racial equity in America. And you'll see that'll be a heavy push by the Biden administration. We'll see how that translates into government contracting. But I would suspect that the Biden administration is going to be very much focused on making sure that minorities have opportunities to gain access to federal procurements. Next slide, please. Now, we are still, as it turns out, in the midst of the pandemic. And there are still commercial impacts transpiring about which we want to think. Next slide, please. Now, one of the most impacted sectors, as you know, has been retail trade. a bedrock of the U.S. economy. Malls and strip malls and so on and so forth. Suffered many large retail bankruptcies in 2020. Here, I've listed a bunch of them here, but the likes of True Religion, Pier 1 Imports, Model Sporting Goods, J. Crew, Neiman Marcus, J.C. Penney, Lord & Taylor, and then Francesca's, which went bankrupt in December, which is one of my daughter's favorite. But a lot of these brands are among my daughter's favorites. They buy from all of them. Brooks Brothers, one of my favorites, went bankrupt as well. That doesn't mean they're going to be liquidated. Though Pier 1 Imports was liquidated, but it does mean that they're restructuring, and often it means that they're going to close stores. And some retailers who have not gone bankrupt, like a Macy's, are closing stores in very large numbers and leaving communities with a lot of vacant retail space, as well as a lot of unemployed retail workers. Next slide, please. And this is despite the fact that retail sales actually were quite strong for much of 2020. This is U.S. retail sales November of 2000 through November of 2020. And, as I said, the recession is dated to begun in February. And that was determined by the National Bureau of Economic Research's Business Cycle Dating Committee. So they're the official arbiter of when recessions begin and end, and they say the recession began in February. And one of the reasons for that is that's when retail sales began to slide. So let's do a rewind here, shall we? So what's going on back in February of 2020? Well, by this time, you and I have heard about COVID-19. The crisis has not begun yet economically. That will begin the following month. But you and I have heard about COVID-19, and so some people began to disengage, at least partially, from the U.S. economy. So you might remember at meetings and conferences, we're no longer shaking hands as aggressively. We might be fist pumping. Then we did the elbow bump. Then we did the kid and play toe tap, if you know what I'm talking about, and you do. But then when we start on the economy in March and April, that's when retail sales fall off the table. Now, what happens thereafter? Well, so let's do some more rewinding. So again, the administration signs the CARES Act on March 27th. And by April, a lot of people are getting checks, whether stepped up unemployment insurance benefits or those $1,200 checks that many Americans received. For a family of four, that was actually quite a bit of money. For instance, 2 kids, 2 adults, for instance. So they're getting money into the household by April, but they can't really spend it very aggressively, can they? The malls are closed, the theaters are closed, the restaurants are closed. So the savings rate takes off in America. Now, as the economy reopens in late April into May and June, that savings hits the economy hard. And you can see retail sales by May and June start to surge. In fact, by June, retail sales are actually above their pre-recession highs. And you can see ongoing progress through the balance of the summer into the fall until October. In October, retail sales begin to fall again. Why is that? By October, those unemployment insurance benefits had run out. People had spent that $1,200. So the stimulus had run out. Meanwhile, with another surge in viral infections that began after Labor Day, after September 4th, more businesses were forced to shut down. More people withdrew from the economy. And I would argue that that's when the second recession began, in October, November, or in December. We'll see what the National Bureau of Economic Research says about that. I would say the first recession began in February, ended by May, and the second recession began sometime earlier this winter. So the V-shaped recovery has become a W. Well, we'll talk more about that in a second. So that's where we are. So, but there was a period in which retail sales were really growing, and yet we had all those bankruptcies. Why is that? Next slide, please, Nicole. It's because a lot of those retail sales took place among internet retailers. It's because Amazon gained market share. It's because the online apparatus of Walmart and eBay and so on and so forth, they gained market share. This is U.S. retail sales by type of business, comparing November 2019 versus November of 2020, and you can see the internet took off. Now, there were some brick and mortar retailers that also did well. Sporting goods, hobby, book, and music stores. What's that about? That's about selling Peloton bikes, for instance, and other exercise equipment, as we couldn't go to the gyms and people needed to exercise at home. Building material and garden supplies dealers. What's that about? That's about a very strong housing market. And the fact that many people wanted to furnish their homes more beautifully because they're spending more time at home. Now, where do we see the loss in retail sales? At the very bottom of the slide, food services and drinking places. That's what economists call what other people call restaurants and bars. So human beings call it restaurants and bars. Economists call it food services and drinking places. That's why so many of us are single. In any case, obviously with social distancing mandates, that was a prime source of suffering. But gasoline stations, well, naturally, we didn't drive as much. I mean, one of the benefits of 2020 was you didn't spend quite as much time stuck on the Beltway, did you? And I didn't spend as much time stuck on the Baltimore Beltway either, 695. Clothing and clothing accessory stores. Well, of course, if we're working remotely, why do we have to spend so much on clothing? Question for you, am I wearing pants? You don't know, and I'm not telling. So some retailers won and some retailers didn't, but clearly the biggest winner was online sales. Next slide, please. Now, one of the other phenomenon relates to the housing market. I want to spend a little bit of time on that before concluding. So I'm from Baltimore, and we Baltimore Wizards are always assigned to Ravenclaw. In Pittsburgh, for instance, Pittsburgh Wizards are always assigned to Slytherin, as it turns out, but set that aside, this is well known. So next slide, please. Now, one of the impacts of the pandemic was to drive interest rates lower. Here I'm showing you two interest rates of interest, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate in blue and the 15-year fixed mortgage rate in red. And so mortgage rates fell last year. And it should not surprise anyone in this audience that home prices were rising prior to the crisis. Well, of course they were. We're adding more jobs, unemployment is low, income growth is pretty rapid, stock market was doing well before the pandemic, people are pretty confident from a consumer perspective, and again, mortgage rates are favorable. So next slide, please. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that home prices were rising prior to the crisis. I think what one could view as somewhat amazing is that the pace of home price appreciation accelerated during the pandemic. We're down 9.4 million jobs. Unemployment has basically doubled, since February, even with all those people dropping out of the labor market, more than doubled if you take that into account. And yet, home price appreciation has accelerated. Now, one of the backdrops to this is the fact that we didn't have many homes available for sale coming into the crisis, and we have even fewer now. Now, not just low mortgage rates have been at work. So too is the fact that many people wanted more aggressively social distance during the pandemic. They want more space attached to their residence because they're spending more time at home. They want space for a dedicated home office because they want to look good on Zoom or go to a webinar. I'm trying right now. And of course, demographics have been supporting. The millennials are coming of age. The oldest of the millennials this year will turn 40. A lot of them now are in their 30s, and many are approaching their 30s. The most common age in America this year is 29. We have more 29-year-olds than any other age. Now, 5 years ago, the most common age was 24. What do 24-year-olds do? Well, lots of nonsense, but they might rent an apartment. But in 5 years, the most common age will be 34. What do 34-year-olds do? Well, also lots of nonsense, but they might buy a home. So the demographics are very supportive, but the pandemic has accelerated this trend. Next slide, please. Now, there are some really interesting migration trends or phenomena that are occurring because of this. So this is U.S. net migration in metropolitan areas. So the red bar is migration out of people from principal cities. And you've heard about this, Manhattan and San Francisco and other cities. The blue color bar here represents, and this is in millions. This is millions of people. So nearly 3 million people, meanwhile, have moved into suburbs. Some of them from rural areas, some of them from cities. So the big winner appears to be suburbs, which is, of course, where many of the homes available for sale are. Next slide, please. Here's another way of looking at it. The observed rent declines in certain major U.S. cities, like San Francisco, where rent growth between March and December was negative 27%. Seattle, Boston, New York, Washington, D.C. What's going on here? For a long time, young people in particular have been renting high-cost apartments, often in new construction. But now they look around and say, look, mortgage rates are favorable. I'm about to turn 30. I want to form a household. I'm ready to get married. I want to have children. I'm ready to go to the suburbs, whether Montgomery County, Prince George's County, or Prince William County, whatever it happens to be. So that's where the push is right now. Next slide, please. There's another way of looking at it. Observe rent declines in cities versus suburbs. So if you think about suburban cities, so what are suburban cities? In a Washington, D.C. context, it would be Alexandria, Bethesda, Rockville. In a Baltimore context is Towson, Columbia, Owings Mills. But you can see rent declines have been much sharper in principal cities, those center cities, compared to suburban cities. Next slide, please. And one of the things that this does is it triggers more construction. This is residential building permits. Now, permits are a leading indicator of residential construction. Why? Because you got to pull a permit before you can build anything. You got to pull it from a relevant government authority. I won't go through all this in the interest of time, and I want to get to Q&A in just about 3 or 4 minutes. But what you can see if you look carefully at the slide is the one-unit structure, the single-family homes, are the red segments of these bars, and that's where we see a profound increase in building permits. It's an intention to build. So you're going to see a lot more single-family housing construction going forward. I would think that the multifamily market, especially the luxury apartment building segment of the economy, will not fare nearly as well during the decade ahead as it did during the decade past. This decade is going to be about more home ownership and more movement to the suburbs. Next slide, please. Now, we can talk about commercial construction as well. This is another leading indicator. This is the Architecture Billings Index. I know we've got some construction firms out there, so I wanted to talk about this. You see the 50-yard line running west across that slide. Again, and congratulations to the Washington football team as well as to the Baltimore Ravens for making the playoffs. But any reading below 50 means that architects are less busy this month collectively than they were last month. Well, you can see if you look at the readings here, architects each and every month for the last few months have been getting less and less busy. So not as much design work, not as many hotels being designed, not as many office buildings being designed. Well, of course, commercial construction is in crisis in much of the country. Next slide, please. And you can see that in the form of construction spending. So I want to focus on the bottom of the slide here. So this is comparing November 2019 construction spending versus November of 2020. Look at lodging, that's hotel room construction. It's down nearly 27% on a year-ago basis. What about office space? Down 6.3%. But that's misleading too. Traditional office space is down more than that. Data centers are also classified in that office space category. And data centers are richly under construction. So again, lots of weakness, I think, going forward in the luxury apartment building market, the office building market, the hotel construction market, but there are some segments like fulfillment centers, data centers, and of course, single family homes that will countervail some of that weakness. Next slide, please. So let's go to the home stretch here of the presentation, the forecast. Next slide, please. So there's some various leading indicators. Here's one. This is University of Michigan's Index of Consumer Sentiment. What it says is very simple. Consumers are not that confident. And here's the thing. A lot of us economists have this feeling that the back half of 2021 will be spectacular for economic growth. And it well may be. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of people are telling us through polls that even after there's broad vaccinations around the country, that they're still going to be reluctant to necessarily engage the economy fully. They'll still be scared, even if they themselves are vaccinated. So that's an interesting phenomenon. Now, that said, I'm not that worried about the demand side of the economy. Next slide, please. I know there's a narrative right now about food insecurity in America. Lots of people having to go to food pantries. True. I know there's a lot of discussion right now about evictions and a lot of people facing mass eviction. True. But there are another group of families who've saved a lot of money. This is the U.S. savings rate. This is savings as a percentage of personal disposable income. Now, coming into the crisis, the U.S. savings rate is about 8%. By April, which is that peak there, it's 34%. What happened? Money started coming to the household, but people couldn't spend it. Again, restaurants closed, theaters closed, malls closed, and there's only so much Grubhub you can order. Now, again, as the economy reopens, those savings hit the economy hard. Retail sales take off. We had 4.8 million jobs in June. That is history. But as late as November, the savings rate is still a lofty 12.9%. So there's still a lot of households who have amassed cash. So this is not about a lack of aggregate demand in the economy. There's still demand out there. Next slide, please. What is the issue here? The issue is that many businesses are still shut down. This is the National Federation of Independent Business Index of Small Business Optimism. Question, is it a good time to expand your business? And you can see a lot of businesses saying, no, it's not a good time to expand my business. And by expansion for a lot of these businesses, it means getting back toward where they were back in February. But they don't feel comfortable even beginning that process because they're worried right now. And because many restaurants and others are facing the effects of these shutdowns. And we don't know, and businesses don't know, what the Biden administration will do upon inauguration January 2021 with respect to further lockdowns as we try to contain this coronavirus spread, which is, of course, surging in America, a country in which we have more than 4,000 deaths per day now, due to COVID-19, and where public health officials suggesting that number will soon be above 6,000 per day. Next slide, please. And the next slide happens to be my final slide. So look, for an economy to flourish, both demand and supply sides of the economy must participate. Demand is ready in some sense, not for every family. There's been a K-shaped recovery. The rich have gotten richer. A lot of other people's not so much. But in the aggregate, there's some spending power out there. How many of you are waiting to take your next vacation? Have money set aside for that next vacation, and you're ready to go. 3, 4 vacations in 2021, maybe, if you can do it, if you have the time for it. And additional stimulus measures or additional stimulus is forthcoming. So demand will get a further boost as people get more checks in, this time of the $600 variety. But supply will still be constrained by additional lockdown measures, and not just in America. Look what's going on in England and Spain and other countries around the world. The result is that in the short term, the savings rate in America will climb once again, spring-loading the economy for rapid economic growth once vaccines become broadly available. The back half of 2021, therefore, should be spectacular for economic growth. Spectacular. 6% growth would not surprise me at all during the back half of 2021. So the key is to survive until the back half of 2021. Things are going to get better. However, there will also be a day of reckoning as deficit hawks come back into fashion, worrying about the national debt, unleashing debt-ceiling crises, creating the possibility of greater austerity during the years ahead, coming out of federal government agencies. It's a possibility as the national debt is screaming towards $28 trillion and will go even higher with more stimulus measures to be passed. With that, thank you very much to the CRMSDC for the opportunity. Sharon Pender, I will hand it back over to you. I await your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. How exciting and how informative as we anticipated. We're going to take a couple questions at this particular point in time. If you have questions, please place it in the chat. I'll ask Sonia to come on, and I know that there have been some questions that have been accumulating. So Sonia, if we could have a few of those questions.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Sharon. We've had a lot of robust activity in our question box. So Anaban, our first one is around what should businesses do now to prepare in the event that a pandemic or something else happens again?
Look, I would say 3 things. And I should note that I'm a small business owner myself. So most economists are 30,000 feet, and telling businesses what they should do. But I myself have to make payroll every 2 weeks. I myself, I'm supposed to be thinking about the big issues in society, but often I'm thinking about what's my accounts receivable, what's my accounts payable, what's the difference, and when do those receivables come in? So I'm a lot like many of you. So what should businesses do? 3 things, I think. Number 1, preserve cash. Right? Set aside cash. And I know it's easier said than done. I get it. There are always bills to pay. And there's always growth opportunities in front of us and a great employee that you want to hire and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, for those businesses that came in with a bit of a pool of cash, coming into March and April, they were in better shape than others because they could draw upon that cash while the economy was shutting down and people were adjusting to new economic realities. Number 2, maintain those banking relationships. How important was it for many of you to access those Paycheck Protection Program funds? How important was it? It was very important, and one of the ways to access that efficiently and early in the process was to have a great banking relationship. So, if you don't have one of those, a banker that you're on a first name basis with, then have that relationship. And then the third thing, same thing with insurance relationship. And for those of you who are in the construction industry, for instance, one of the reasons that construction firms fail is because they lose their bonding, they lose their insurance. So you want to make sure your business insurance relationship is in good shape, along with your banking relationship. So those are 3 things that I think every business should be doing constantly, trying to maintain a pool of cash and trying to really have great relationships with the financiers that ultimately can decide whether or not to turn off the faucet.
Great, thank you, Anaban. And then as an extension to that, people do want to know, where do you see the long-term opportunities for minority and small business owners? Any areas or sectors where there are some good opportunities for driving more business?
Well, there are many opportunities. I'll tell you, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think because people may disagree with me on this, but I think that a lot of us started our own business because we had to, because no one was offering us a job. So it was either be unemployed or start your own business. And that was exactly my situation in March of 2004 when I started Sage Policy Group. I was unemployed. And I had said on my resume I wasn't getting any callbacks, so I started my own business. So, the question becomes, well, okay, fine. So you start your own business. What are the promising segments? Now, I think because sometimes as entrepreneurs we're scared. We don't know if we're going to make it. We don't want to fail. So sometimes, we take a partner on, and that partnership doesn't work out. But we take it because we think we can't do it by ourselves, so we need a partner. But then we make the wrong choice in terms of partner. Another thing that we do is we look for segments that seem like it's easier to make it. So I know a lot of minority entrepreneurs in particular, whether Asian or Black African American or whatever it happens to be, Hispanic, go into government contracting. Because I said, well, there's some set aside work for me, I have an easier time. But that, of course, leads to a very crowded space and dependence on government budgets. And right now, government budgets are strained. So one of the things I would say to businesses out there, and again, this might sound a bit academic, is that if you are a government contractor, and if you haven't made the leap into the private markets, the private sector, providing the same services that you do to government to the private markets, now I think is the time to start thinking about, and probably was time to think about this earlier, about making that transition, to reduce the reliance on government contracting and to move more forcefully into the global economy. Because I'll tell you, government is big, the private sector is much bigger. So, I don't know if that's a good answer to your question, but that's what I think about. There are so many opportunities in the private sector, and the public sector is in some jeopardy in terms of its spending capacity, given these national debt and underfunded pensions, so on and so forth, student loan crises, these kinds of things. So anyway, that's the answer to that.
Great. Anaban, you mentioned in your presentation that the back half of this year should be great and robust in terms of economic recovery. Do you think the Biden administration will seek another round of stimulus in the back half, or do you think it'll be those policies that he'll move forward to help continue to stimulate the economy?
All of the above. Now, he's going to look for stimulus post-inauguration. And there's been talk about that. The notion was that the $900 billion package signed by President Trump on December 27th was a down payment on stimulus. It was not the end of stimulus. And I think that infrastructure spending gets a big boost going forward. It has to. The Highway Trust Fund goes insolvent within the next year. So they have to put money back into the trust fund and into infrastructure generally. So no, you're going to see lots of stimulus, I think. At least the Biden administration is going to try. Who knows what the Senate is going to do? I know the Senate is 50-50 or 51-50, depending on how you look at it. But again, you've got moderate senators like Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat, but he's a conservative Democrat. And it's just not clear what the dynamics are going to be. The House is going to work very closely with the Biden administration, led by Speaker Nancy Pelosi. But the Senate, it's wide open. But there's going to be an effort. And then, of course, the Biden administration is going to be looking at this K-shaped recovery and trying to make sure that people who have not participated in the recovery or have been damaged by COVID-19 economically more fully participate in the recovery to come.
Great. Thank you, Anaban. We just have a few more, and then we'll close for questions. If there are any additional questions, please put it in the question box. This next one, Anaban, is around what do you think the new normal will look like in terms of businesses, meetings, office spaces, going back to work, the goods and services that will be procured and purchased?
Yeah, so here's what I think. It's very hard to know, but one thing I know as an economist, people are trying to maximize profits. That's the objective of businesses in general. Now, there might be some other goals on top of that, right? Helping a community, so on and so forth. But you got to maximize profits, or at least be financially healthy to survive. So profit maximizers are cost minimizers, right? To maximize profits, you have to minimize operating costs. And one of the ways to minimize operating costs is to have people travel less, commute less. And they're now able to do that because we have this world of remote work, because we're so used to Zoom and GoToWebinar and all these other online platforms. And by the way, I think many employees are going to demand the ability to work from home at least several days a week. Because the old notion that I'm going to get on the Beltway 5 days every week and deal with that traffic, whether the Baltimore Beltway or the Washington Beltway, to get to work, people aren't going to live like that anymore necessarily. A lot of people are going to say, I want an employer who allows me to work from home 3 days a week. So I think we're going to see a lot more remote work. I think you're going to see a lot more online shopping because we're not used to ordering groceries on Instacart and getting food delivered by DoorDash or Grubhub. And that's not going to change much. Don't get me wrong. There'll be some movement back to the malls, the theaters, the cinema, so on and so forth, the restaurants. But there's some stickiness here in terms of our behavioral changes. And so we have to be aware of that.
Great.
Sonia,
And
I
then
think that I think, Sonia, we have one or two more questions. Then we
yes,
go
we have one more that projects a little further out. Annabon, this question is around if you're looking at 5 years or projecting 5 years, what do you see as the five sectors or some of those sectors that will help fuel the economy and the growth?
Yeah. E-commerce, and the backbone of e-commerce is data centers and fulfillment centers. So I think you'll see a lot more distribution activity. Already you see that, but I think you'll continue to see that because Amazon is the most efficient retailer in the world. They have the largest inventory and they can offer you the best prices, as it turns out, on average across product lines. So I think Amazon continues to win. So that's number one. Number two, manufacturing. You're seeing a lot of dismantling of existing global supply chains. The old mantra of you got to produce it in China has died off for many CEOs. You're going to see a lot more reshoring back to America. Number three, the skilled trades. So one of the things that we've seen in America is a shrinking middle class. It's true, but there are lots of middle class employment opportunities for carpenters, electricians, plumbers, machinists, mechanics, truck drivers, so on and so forth. I think you're going to see much more movement to the skilled trades. Number four, two-year colleges. I think two-year colleges get a big bump coming out of this crisis, and so look for that. A lot of migration to your colleges to save on tuition, and also to more directly learn a trade and find one's way into a job. And then finally, the obvious answer: technology, whether it's 3D printing or artificial intelligence, robotics, electric vehicles, so on and so forth. Those are the segments. You've seen Zoom and DocuSign and Tesla and some of these technology companies really take off. I'm not saying their stock prices are reasonable. I am saying that those segments will continue to gather market share and attract a lot of spending power. So in any case, that's my answer to your question.
Annabon, thank you. Sonia, thank you. Annabon, thank you so very, very much. This has been a great exchange of information. We start out this year. This has been an awakening. And so you've been a longtime friend of ours, and we intend to keep checking in with you periodically throughout this year. So thank you for starting us off in the right kind of way. We're now armed with a lot more knowledge to make some decisions, and we are grateful for you presenting this information. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed this as much as I have. Hang in there with us just a few more minutes. We're going to do a couple of things. I'm going to bring Sonia Bigelow-Smith, who is our project manager for our COVID relief, but she's also, she moonlights as our director of business development for the Capital Region Minority Supply Development Council. And so, Sonia, I'm going to let you give away a couple of tickets for Southwest Airlines, who's one of our sponsors. Sonia, I'll be back in a moment.
Great. So this is Annabon. I echo Sharon's comments. Thank you so much for a great informative presentation. And thank you for sharing your insights with us. As you all know, we do this during our webinars with one of our fantastic partners, Southwest Airlines. And I am pleased to be here today to award round trip tickets to not one, but two lucky winners on behalf of Southwest Airlines. Southwest is our official airline of CRMSDC and one of our longest standing partners. The vouchers awarded have no restrictions or blackout dates and can be used in 101 destinations and 10 countries. Now, before I announce the winner, I always have a disclaimer. You have to be present to win. You cannot be a government employee nor a political official. Okay, so great. So drum roll, please. Our first winner for the Southwest Airlines round trip ticket will go to attendee number 101, who is Jacinta Bottoms Spencer. If she is here, if she can either type her name in the chat or open up the mic to acknowledge that she is present to win this voucher? Did we get anything? Jacinta Bottoms Spencer. Okay.
Unfortunately, Ms. Spencer is not present.
Okay. All right. So we'll go to, you have to be present to win. So let's go to our second attendee, number 49, Malcolm Etheridge. Is Malcolm Etheridge present?
It must be a busy day, Sonia. Mr. Etheridge is not present either.
Okay. All right. So let's go to our next winner, number 21, Sharita Gaither. Is Sharita Gaither present? No?
Ms. Gaither, your line has been unmuted. You can unmute yourself and accept your prize.
Okay, she's present. We can hear.
It looks like we lost her as well. She might have just signed off by accident.
Okay, so I am going to select two more individuals. Gregory Billups. Gregory Billups, are you present? I see a hand raised. Can we unmute his line?
Hello,
Hello, Gregory.
I am here.
All right, great. Well, we will capture your information and our team will be back in touch with you as you will you will be one of our lucky winners for the round trip ticket.
Thank you very much.
Great. And our next winner will be Hope Smith. Is Hope Smith present?
Hope Smith is here.
Great, Hope, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
You'll be one of our winners for the Southwest Airlines round trip ticket. So thank you both. We will have a member of our team to reach out to you to extend this fabulous award. We would like to thank Southwest Airlines on behalf of the Capital Region Minority Supplier Development Council for staying in partnership with us and for their gracious awards. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Sonia. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to keep you much longer, just as we have an opportunity to share just some additional information with you about some of our upcoming events. If we could, so first of all, the contact information, go back, Nicole, I'm sorry, contact information about for today, our email addresses are there. Any questions that you may have or comments, there's an email address there as well, covid19@crmsdc.org. Nicole, if you can go to the next slide, what we have here, you can, in a few days, this presentation will be available for you to view, but on YouTube and on our website, we have prior versions or editions of our webinars, and whether it's about contract tracing or cybersecurity or what we've done in the past around doing business with the federal government. I took away some great nuggets today about federal contracting and the private sector, things that we've been saying for a while. That's for another time. We're going to move from, we're going to continue to do webinars, but we're going to expand our space and kind of stretch our arms, and we're going to be doing hot chat podcasts. And we have on deck to talk about to Antonio Das, who's a district director for SBA, and we're going to get into information about the new stimulus, new PPP, all those things. And then we're going to also talk to Victor Hoskins. People know Victor, his work in economic development and bringing Amazon to the area, and his work now as the economic development leader, CEO of Fairfax County. And we're going to have some MBEs that we'll be focusing on as well. Examples, that is April Richardson, who has DC Sweet Potato Cakes, and other of our MBEs. That's kind of what's on deck next. And we have some other things that we're rolling out this year. We'll continue to roll out. Our MBE to MBE Mentor Protege program is one of them, Lift as We Climb. We also have, and if you're interested in that, please email us. We're going to be unveiling a new concept, what we call the Ultimate Business Makeover. We'll be making over some selected businesses within our network. And then we're also going to get on a plane. We have done previously our Get on the Plane business tour, where we've flown MBEs to other markets where they can be introduced to opportunities there. And we anticipate doing that this year as well. So stay tuned, stay connected with us, because we have your interest at heart. We say thank you to all of our corporate members that continue to hold up our mission and be a part. These are folks, if you're a part of our network, if you're certified by us, that you have access or connection to these folks. And if you're seeking to join a group of like-minded corporate members, we're open to that as well. So thank you once again for staying tuned. Thank you for your contribution, and we get to see you the next time. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one other thing. Thank you for the team. I cannot of our COVID CARES Act team with Sonia Bigelow-Smith and Latoya Moore, Nicole Miles, Jacob Brown, and of course, Annabon Basu. All of our team of the Capital Region Minority Supply Development Council and the consultants with MBDA, our project directors, Tommy Marks and Dennis Smith and their teams. We thank you. And again, our information is available on the website. See you next time.